A few days ago, North Carolina voters passed a ban on same-sex marriage in the state. On the same day, President Obama announced his support of same-sex marriage. In one day, it seems like the whole country was put at odds with one another, and the tension is palpable. Currently living outside of the country, I have a bit of a strange perspective on what happens in America. It seems like things that are happening in America are happening in some sort of strange world that doesn't really exist, but I'm acutely aware of the fact that it's a world to which I will one day, probably sooner than later, have to return. And what I see terrifies me. Every day I read about a war in which America is participating. And no, not the real wars, not the ones where soldiers are living away from home and actively engaged with somebody who literally would prefer them dead. Instead, I read about the other wars. The war on women, the war on traditional marriage, the war on equality, the war on religion. We've come to define a statement of political opinion as an act of war. Now, I've always heard that the pen is mightier than the sword, but don't you think this is taking it a little bit too far? The issue that I take with such terminology is that it contributes to destructive rather than constructive relationships. If someone attacks you, you're obligated to counterattack. It relieves you of any responsibility to try to understand them, and any attempt to do so would be your own defeat. And it seems that defeat has become the most feared of all outcomes. We're not even fighting to win anymore, we're just fighting to avoid losing. We're too proud to admit that the best possible solution to a problem could be one that requires us to empathize with someone else. This is not democracy. Democracy presumes that every opinion is heard and carefully considered. Democracy presumes that by engaging in a discussion, we can mutually come to the best solution. It requires us to talk with each other, not at each other. It requires listening, careful consideration, a few concessions, and eventually agreement. So no, this is not democracy. This is war. We cling desperately to our beliefs and turn everything we have against theirs. We want to stop them at all costs. But as John Green once said, there is no them. There are only facets of us. We have to understand that we are all Americans, whether or not we agree. And if we continue to fight, we're only fighting ourselves and tearing ourselves down. So here's my challenge for you. Engage in a discussion with somebody. Try to understand each other. A little bit of sympathy can go a long way. You'll be amazed at what we can accomplish if we spend our time discussing rather than debating, listening instead of calculating, and ultimately building rather than destroying. It's time to take action and reopen the veins of communication. It's time to make a treaty. It's time to end the war. I'll see you guys next time.